We're back with the Mythic Dungeon International as we're getting ourselves ready for our lower finals matchup. Now, 40K off the back of that win has secured their BlizzCon spots, but now they can also play spoiler for some of the BlizzCon seeding. Abrakeydabra wants to be able to get back into that grand finals, hopefully beat Method NA to overtake them on this one, Tettles, as that'll mean they'll have that second place spot going into BlizzCon.
Yeah, and it's going to start up in a freehold, which we saw from Abrakeydabra a little bit earlier. It's going to be interesting to see if 40K sticks to the double Unholy Death Knight, because we know Abrakeydabra was playing that one monk, one rogue, one Death Knight strategy inside of the freehold. So we'll end up seeing what they end up bringing to this teaming freehold.
That's true, and we also were able to kind of compare that as well to Method NA, who was playing on the freehold earlier with an incredibly quick time. They were cutting a lot of these dungeons pretty close when they faced up again, when Abrakeydabra and Method NA were kind of facing up. So when we're going from freehold into Waycrest, we go into 3 games, and we have Motherload into more time trials. Very interesting to start seeing how these things start shaping up, as Twitch chat certainly has a favor of Abrakeydabra at 72% as we're getting ready for game number 1 in freehold.
Yeah, so, I mean, Abra, even though they lost the match against Method NA in the field earlier, it was so close. It was 7 seconds between Method NA and Abra, and both of them had such a good strategy in such a fast time. So it's going to be hard for 40K to match up with Abra here. 40K not actually bringing the double DK, as we've seen from Method NA. 40K really liked the double DK, so interesting that they're not bringing it here for this freehold.
I mean, I could see a scenario in which not having enough practice would make it so you don't really want to run the double Unholy DK. It's interesting because I think all of us think it's for these dungeons where you're, especially on teaming, it seems like a double Unholy DK would just lend itself perfectly to this dungeon. Or maybe they just don't think that you really benefit that much from running 2 of them over 1 of them, because for a lot of these pulls on teaming, 1 Unholy DK can kind of take control of the pull, and you can see for both teams here in a second here, Curry already on 40K, and now Ashine as well for Abrakeydabra, both popping up to immense amounts of damage, over 500k, over 500,000 DPS for both of them, 600k for Ashine actually, and you can see, I mean, the 1 Unholy DK does deal with the pull by itself as well. Of course, the only scenario in which you're talking about the double Unholy DK probably being better is when you can pull stuff on top of the boss, which you can't really do for Sky Captain Crag, so it makes sense that they're not really planning on doing it here. They didn't do that big of a pull, so they didn't do as big a pull as we've seen from other teams. I think Method NA has 27% for the first pull, so some ridiculous amount. So it makes sense to not. I can see a world in which the double Unholy DK isn't something these teams really want to put time into practicing, because I think it's a lot more important to have better pulls in this dungeon and more accuracy with how cleanly you're killing everything, rather than just trying to arbitrarily start a new comp for what seems like not that big of an upside.
Yeah, because, I mean, when we saw Abra versus Method NA earlier, I mean, Method NA just won by a couple of seconds, right? So the double DK strat, not as much better as just a standard comp with the Windwalker here in place of the Mistweaver, and of course also not having the double DK. But 40K, unfortunately, finishing off this pull quite a bit slower compared to Abra. Now, they also pulled more trash, so they got 23% instead of the 19% for Abra. But the amount of time it took them to finish it off, just, you know, the mobs were not grouped, they were those green pools on the floor, they couldn't reach the last couple of mobs, just not getting the huge, not getting this AoE cleave on the mobs that they want to. Now, interestingly enough, Abra is popping their Bloodlust here at the second phase, so that's something we don't see that often, just because you just want to have it on the pull, right, once all of the cooldowns are being popped. But maybe this is just a safety Bloodlust because they had trouble surviving this boss, because in the first phase the boss is mounted on the bird and is doing a little bit of random AoE, but he's not doing the powder shots, which are the dangerous part and where you can get one shot. So using the Bloodlust here, maybe something for safety.
Yeah, absolutely a safety thing, like 100%. I think we see this from a lot of teams where they even have their DKs save their Army of the Deads for this part of the phase, because you can see the health bars. Whenever one player gets hit by that powder shot, they take almost 90% of their HP. It's just a massive amount of single target damage. You don't want to deal with that as much as possible. It's just super dangerous to see.
Yeah, and then we also see 40K doing the exact same thing, actually. They were also popping their Bloodlust for the second phase. They also used their army in the second phase, exactly what you just said. And you see just how much damage this powder shot does as well. Ashine dropping so incredibly low as he gets hit by that. And of course, we see both of the Rassadors just being on range there to bait those pools on the floor. Unfortunately, Ashine and Dr. J clipping the powder shot, both of them getting hit. That's something you really want to avoid, and that's why you see this positioning here in melee as well. They try to, they're sitting pulling around the boss in kind of a square positioning just to be sure that they don't get double hits from the cone. So mistake there by Abrakeydabra. Thankfully it didn't cost them, as Smok was able to heal both of them up before the next powder shot came in. So Abra definitely the ones who finish the boss up faster, and they also get the 23%, so that the percentage they were missing to 40k because they were pulling it on top of Sky Captain Crack here, while 40k dealt with all of the trash first and then single targeted the boss. So in the end, advantage for Abra.
Yep, I mean, we always talked about it, and I think there was a scenario at the start of the summer season where we talked about how it almost seemed like pulling trash on top of the boss wasn't necessarily the best strategy. It seems like it should be the best strategy because you're taking efficiency into account. You're not single targeting your cleaving stuffs down, and you always do more damage when you cleave. That's just the nature of the game. But in the grand scheme of things, almost all the first weekend cup maps we saw, the team that pulled stuff on top of the bosses had a tough time dealing with boss mechanics while they were doing it, and it took them longer to deal with. Of course, as these teams go through the weeks and the cups and they get more familiar with how to do these trash pulls, it looks like it's definitely the best play, especially once teams started taking advantage of that unholy DK cleaving damage onto the boss. That's really the name of the game, and there's a reason we keep talking about it, because it's just so prevalent in all this cup play. It lets you do so much more damage to the boss than you would otherwise normally do. You get an extra 15-20% damage on the boss from it almost every single time. It's just so good in general for skipping boss mechanics.
Yeah, we see Abra preparing the huge pull that they did the last time around as well, where they are going to pull all of this trash on top of the boss. We're going to see it happen right now. So we saw a bunch of CC happening here, which is really nice to see. Shine was gripping out the Brime Scale, one of the caster mobs, because they didn't want to deal with it on top of the boss. They were gripping it out, and Swag was paralyzing it, so they're seeing it in the corner just so they don't have to deal with it. Now first they're going to AoE down all of this trash, and you can see just how much damage a Shine is doing here. And once most of the trash is down, they can grip the Brime Scale that is CC'd in the corner on top as well, and then they will just chain pull trash on top. Once this is that, they will chain even more trash on top, and this is so efficient, as Sarah just mentioned, just because you have to deal with the boss anyway. So if you manage to pull trash on top, it's just so efficient, as long as you don't lose a lot of damage on the boss because you're dealing with other stuff.
I mean, that was just a perfect execution of that pull. Pulling all the trash on top of each other, making sure it's all stacked up, waiting to do actual AoE damage until the bosses are in that group so you can make sure you're getting the full unholy DK cleave on top of the boss. And by the time all the trash was dead, the bosses were both at 80%. Like we mentioned, 20% of the boss's HP for free just because you set up the pull. I think Ashine topped out at 1.6 million DPS, and they were in combat for 20 seconds before that as well. That's just a ridiculous amount of damage. Now, of course, I'm sitting here talking up Ashine a lot, and then he goes down, so that's not what you want to see. And it looks like they also reset the boss, so all the damage we're talking about is just gone. Like, what? Okay, that's really unfortunate. He's going to actually not accept that battle res. They're going to go ahead and get a regular res on him, I believe. That's just unfortunate to see because they set up that pull perfectly. However, on the side of 40k, they're also having troubles. Igloo going down and Curry also going down. So we're talking a big game about these DKs, but both of them have died.
Okay, so the huge problem here for 40k was that they were trying to do the same pull as Abra did on top of the boss, but they were not seeing the Brime Scales. They were just pulling them in, and the problem is they're casters, so they were standing in on range, they were constantly casting, they didn't really stack up with the rest of them because they only have one single target grip from the DK come in, and they were just not able to stack up their range with the rest of the mobs. And then the range were constantly casting those spells, then Igloo went down, Kiro went down, and there's just no way of them to recover this. So they had to reset the boss on 40k's side and just get them back up, and now they have to re-engage. Now, unfortunately, Abra though, not the same problem. They weren't resetting it on purpose. It actually was a mistake for them to reset the boss. But they had some trouble with the Void Touched Emissary. As you can see it in the back left corner for Abra right now, there's a Void Touched Emissary, and how those groups are playing this boss is by just trying to outrange the cast and not getting in combat with it at all. They don't even want to go close there, but they somehow got in combat with it. It was casting AoE in the group, and they were getting hit by the AoE as well. At least they managed to down the trash, so they're up to 46% compared to the 39. But having to re-engage this boss while having used all of those cooldowns already, definitely a big problem for them.
Now, of course, in the Council of Captains, we are consistently on the tournament realm, perpetually, as a matter of fact, in a state where Captain Eudora will be the friendly one of the captains. Man, I would envision a scenario in which people watching this that play live keys would love this, where Eudora is never somebody they have to deal with. Unfortunately, just Tournament Realm, they don't have to deal with Eudora, so they do have Captain Raoul and Jolly to deal with. Just a lot of ground AoE that they have to dodge. They have to dodge the Whirlpool Blades, they have to dodge the Cutting Surge, and of course, you can't stand in that barrel smash from Captain Raoul either. Now, of course, for friendly buffs, they do have those barrels that are constantly being tossed out, those brews that are being tossed out over the fight. Of course, there are 3 different ones. You can either get a crit buff, a haste buff, or a damaging dot. And of course, the bosses can be dealt with as well. They can get hit by those brews as well. So you're going to see Divinefield try to kite both these bosses around to get hit by every single one of those bad brews. And whenever you see that brew debuff on both of the bosses, they're going to be taking insane amounts of damage from that bad brew. And I think over the course of the fight, the bad brews will do almost as much damage as the players. Maybe not that much, maybe something like a quarter to 30% of the boss's HP. But if you're able to successfully kite both of the bosses into every single one of the bad brews, it very, very significantly speeds up the encounter.
Yeah, lots of people are unhappy if they get a bad brew because it doesn't buff their own damage with the crit or the haste. But the bad brew is a lot more damage on the bosses than a buff would be on the player. So definitely want to have the dot damage over time effect, this negative brew effect, much rather than the positive effect. Now we see Abrakeydabra moving on as to down the boss. They're doing a pretty significant pull here in this arena. They already started the event, so Ludwig will spawn soon, and they will probably pull this trash on top of Ludwig once he's here. And there we go.
Oh yeah, perfectly done, and they're already on Ludwig. They got trash on top of Ludwig, and we talked about it yesterday when we were watching Mythic Dungeon. They do this pull in about 4 different pulls. Hold on a second, your Divinefield dropping incredibly low and just getting out, using the Ring of Peace to make sure everything stays away from him, making sure he doesn't take any extra melee damage that's unnecessary. Of course, once he's healed back, he can go back in and do some damage, but the problem with kiting this pull is everything gets all spread out, and they're not able to do very efficient cleave. Usually with the double Unholy DK, this would all be dead by now, but because Ashen was unable to get a lot of efficient cleave when everything was spread out, it's still alive. It's still going to be hitting Divinefield. Fortunately, it looks like he's in a pretty safe spot now that he's been healed back to full, so he doesn't have to worry too much. He can just slowly kite around and not make sure he's taking too much of that melee damage. But a little scary for a second there. There was a lot going on. That spread could have had a lot of consequences for them, but they're able to pull it back together.
Yeah, these kind of pulls are pretty dangerous because you just saw how Smog got gripped into the pack twice by the Harpooners, who throw out one of those hooks and they just hook you into melee range. Now, there's so many things that can go wrong with this. You can get hooked into one of those shells and just get knocked somewhere, and it does a lot of damage, the shells, if you get hit by them, and then you also get knocked, and you can get knocked into some other AoE effect that will just kill you. We've seen it multiple times, actually. Also, later on when we have Trothak, and Trothak just casts any of the whirlwind effects or any other AoE damage, and if you get gripped into those, you're gonna be in trouble as well. So you definitely want to watch out for that. Now, Abra did down Ludwig here. They are pulling even more trash now. They're gonna wait until Trothak spawns and then pull the trash on top. Now, this is a very dangerous pull as well. So you want to watch out on what Abra is doing here. The last time around, they had Dr. J die on this very pull, but they have 2 battle rashes available, so they can get them back up.
We saw on the side of 40k, they didn't have to kite that pull out at all, and as a result, they dealt with that pack probably about twice as fast as Abrakeydabra did. Curry is staying very consistently at 250k, while during that pull, Ashen was barely topping out at around 140k after the kiting occurred, so they were definitely able to deal with that a lot quicker than Abrakeydabra, and it's just an extra little opening to get them back in this dungeon. They do have 2 extra deaths on the board, and of course, they weren't able to deal with the boss as efficiently after they had those 2 deaths to the trash, plus they had to reset the boss. So it's a little bit unfortunate for 40k so far, but just these small little openings are going to help them come back in the dungeon, but it's still on Abrakeydabra to make smaller mistakes to let them come back.
Yeah, most definitely. We see 40k probably doing or preparing for the same pull as Abrakeydabra was just doing. Now, thankfully, Abra did finish off all the trash here, so they only have Trothak left to deal with. 40k also ramping up, trying to gather all of those mobs to pull it on top of Trothak as well. Kuri does have the army available for the single target damage. He's not really going to help them out for the AoE. I would say that the trash mobs are much more dangerous than the boss itself, so the faster the mobs go down, the better for them. As you can see, Kuri just going up to 800, 900k DPS here, while Abra 56% already on Trothak, while Smog deals with the sharks here, and everyone else just, DPS braining the boss.
Yeah, just going single target. They're letting the Unholy DK take care of things, making sure he gets absolutely max stacks on his Fester Might traits, just so he makes sure he gets full single target damage out there. And yeah, 40k, because of how efficiently they dealt with this trash so far, they are only a couple trash percentage behind and 20% behind on the boss. They're doing a fantastic job of coming back in this dungeon. So these are very small changes that we're looking at. They're only 2% behind on trash, only 20% behind on the boss, and they're only 10 seconds behind in deaths. The door is completely open for them if they do anything just very slight slightly better than Abrakeydabra for the rest of the dungeon, they will be coming back and making this a very close match.
Yeah, most definitely. The fact that both of those teams unfortunately had resets on the second boss, just and as you mentioned, 40K just dealing with the trash better, just being more efficient, having this better execution time. Now, unfortunately, dealing with the trash faster on top of those boss pulls is actually just not going to help you that much, because you still have to deal with the boss, right? So you still have those single target mob that you have to deal with, and it's still 20% difference on a tyrannical fight. But again, there's so many things they can do wrong on the Harlan Suite encounter, and most of those teams, they are doing those risky pulls where you pull the trash packs on top of Harlan Suite, you commit your Bloodlust, but then you have enforcers throwing your tank around, and you can get knocked into random things like volcanics on the floor. There's so much RNG that can happen and that can cause a wipe. So there's definitely lots of things that can go wrong for Abra here. But so far, decently clean after this reset that unfortunately happened for them. And both of the teams, of course, also have their Bloodlust ready, and they are saving it for this first pull on Harlan Suite with the trash on top.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe Abrakeydabra is done with trash. All the rest of their trash percentage is going to come from trash that they pull on top of Harlan Suite. And of course, they'll cleave with the Unholy DK for the first pull with Bloodlust, and then of course Cannon Barrage will deal with the rest of the trash packs afterwards. So I think they're done right now. 40K does need a few more trash percentage. I don't think we've seen teams go to Harlan Suite with 70% just yet. They'd have to pretty much pull all of the trash right around Harlan Suite to make that work. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Abrakeydabra did pull trash before the bridge, so they're actually going to have to go a very long way here to make sure they get their Shadow Meld skip off that we see most teams try to pull off here. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. This is actually pretty dangerous that they pulled that trash. Usually you want to Shroud by it and not get aggro on anything. So hopefully they're going to be able to pull this off without a hitch. Have to keep an eye on that. A lot of teams make mistakes when they do the skip here.
Yeah, so you see the Void Touch Emissary also being in combat here, and that's why they dropped so low. But thankfully, they did get the Shadow Meld off. No one is in combat. You see a Buccaneer still casting there, but he just finishes the cast as he runs off. And now we will see the huge pull come in for Abra as they engage Harlan Suite and immediately charge into this pack. We see the army being casted by Ashan. You see the Bloodlust being popped, just all of the cooldowns being used here. You want to keep an eye on Divine Field, just to see if he can stay alive with all of this trash coming in, and then forces just throwing him around. Swipe is dropping incredibly low as he got hit by any frontal probably, but because of Ashan doing so much AoE damage and now the friendly fire come in by this artillery, as you can see it being kited beautifully, they are almost done with the trash. Only 2 enforcers left.
Something really interesting just occurred. Abrakeydabra and 40K did their skips to Harlan Suite completely differently. Abrakeydabra used their Shroud to go on the bridge side near the chasm, whereas 40K opted to go all the way back around through the path that they already cleared to Trothak. I'm interested to see if that actually saves time for Abrakeydabra where they run through that way. It's got to be faster. It's a more direct route for sure. I wonder if it takes extra time though with the Shroud setup. Maybe Tettles can take a look at that here, but that's really interesting just to see differences in routes and where teams are running. That's pretty interesting to see, especially in a dungeon like Freehold where teams have sort of figured out what kind of pull patterns they want to do. Just seeing different running patterns is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, so 40K also doing this huge pull at the start with the Bloodlust. They also pulled the patrol with the officer here. I'm not completely sure if this was intended or if they just socially aggroed it because they pulled this middle pack. Either way, they dealt with it well. They only have the officer back alive, so they should be able to finish it soon. There's still 17% that 40K has to do, while Abra only has 15%. But Igloo is actually running mass route, so that can help them out if they want to pull any of those Ravager packs. Just root them in a corner somewhere, just have the painful motivation go off and deal with the trash without anyone else having to do anything. So that might be a little bit of a percentage that 40K can gain. Now, if you look at the boss difference though, I don't think 40K can catch up anymore. This is going to be super hard for them because Abra almost on 30% here, which means there will be an increased damage gain on the boss, and they're dealing with the last couple of trash that they have to do to get the 100%.
Yeah, you have to remember that the last 30% of the boss is double damage, so it's really only 15% of the boss. So technically speaking, if you want to math that out, Abra is only at 23% on the boss right now, whereas 40K still has about 40% of the boss HP to deal with. They're very significantly behind. Abrakeydabra is almost done with this boss. This boss is about to get melted once they hit 30%, whereas 40K still has an entire phase to go through, an entire extra set of trash to deal with. For Abrakeydabra, all they have to do once Harlan Suite is dead is just tap a Ravager, let it cast Painful Motivation, and the dungeon is over. And honestly, Zmok might go tag that when the boss is at like 5% just so they get a faster timer here. Now, that being said, this Freehold wasn't necessarily the fastest Freehold we've seen. We saw, I believe, a sub 16 from Mythic Dungeon earlier in the tournament. But still, even with the small mistakes, especially with the reset on Council Captains, this is still a pretty quick time.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra definitely had a lot better run earlier when they're playing against Mythic Dungeon, but this time around with the reset coming in, unfortunately not as well, but they still 1-0 against 40K here as they're down Howling Suite.
It wasn't as perfect as they would have liked onto that one, but it got them the win, and that is what is most important. It's Abrakeydabra takes game number 1 in the freehold. Pretty convincing fashion onto that one. After we saw some of those deaths coming out for 40K, Abrakeydabra just wasn't going to let them have that win.
Yeah, and just how both teams ended up handling like the trash around Council of Captains, like having some deaths, and just how you were handling the trash in general. It seemed like it was Abrakeydabra was a little bit more prepared with how to deal with freehold specifically. 40K may have practiced this dungeon, like they looked pretty well practiced, but it looked like Abrakeydabra just had the advantage in terms of like what was absolutely the best strategy in order to be able to deal with this. Like we saw from how they were playing with against Mythic Dungeon earlier, both of these teams look pretty close as well. It looks like they're both in decent form, and it looks like we're going to probably be shaping up to have a pretty solid second match inside of Waycrest Manor. But 40K and Abrakeydabra through the first boss, it was pretty neck and neck. I think 40K's trash got a little bit more spread than Abrakeydabra, so it was a little bit harder for them to be able to DPS it down evenly, so it cost them just a little bit of time, and that shows the importance of making sure that all the mobs are really tightly grouped for prolonged periods of time. And then basically Council of Captains happens for both teams where there was just a few mistakes on both ends, and then Abrakeydabra does this nice thing where they're using Lightfoot potions in order to be able to get around quicker. Most of the times teams will end up trying to save potions for damage pots, but there are a few moments, and there are like a lot of times that I think the teams could be optimizing their pathing, like how they're running through the dungeon, how they're doing their skips just a little bit more than they are currently. We've seen like a lot of issues with death skips, like people or people dying whenever they're trying to be like trying to use Shadow Meld and stuff like that. So it can be problematic, but overall, this was a pretty clean run from Abrakeydabra overall. What did Zamok just die to right there?
Hey, they won, all right? He was cheering with his friends.
Yeah. Victory death.
Victory death. I mean, you know, the deaths don't count after the timer ends onto that one, so you don't have to worry about it. Next round, we're going to have freehold coming up, so we'll be taking a quick break before we go into it, guys. Don't go anywhere. Round 2 of our lower finals coming up after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International, and now that we know all 6 teams that will be going to BlizzCon, be sure to check out that Transmorpher Beacon or Horden Alliance Fireworks to get a great toy and support those teams for the prize pool at the end of the year. Hello everyone, I'm Jack, and joining me for our lower finals, round 2, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and Tettles. Waycrest Manor going into this one. We've seen a lot of it, I feel like, this weekend, Tettles. We've seen a lot of it. We've seen a lot of Mistweaver monks, but also that high potential for those explosive runs.
Yeah, explosive bursting Waycrest Manor is pretty deadly. We've seen some issues with explosive occurring just due in part with like some of the skips or just the wide range of like how many huge mob pulls that you actually get from the courtyard area and in Rawl's room. So it'll be interesting to see how these two teams tackle this dungeon.
Especially because we have to deal with some of the greater skips we've seen previously. Since it's fortified, we're trying to avoid a lot of the matrons in most pulls. So especially courtyard, we saw a very big pressure point of grabbing all the mobs, bringing them to the side, pulling the Soulbound Goliath and bringing it back into the courtyard so you can skip a little bit here and there. But when you have explosive to factor into it as well, we saw that was kind of the bane of some of these teams.
And some of these teams are also electing to pull Matron Alma, who has actually got an account buff coming into this patch as well.
And looking at this matchup, you got to think 40K in their head, in their mental game, they got to think, man, if we can just take Jay out in Waycrest Manor, we have Motherlode. And Motherlode is their home. If they can somehow win Waycrest Manor, you got to think that 40K thinks they can take this series.
That's going to be quite a challenge. Waycrest Manor is named that way for a reason, but you're right. If they do, we got 40K Motherlode. Yes, it works. It does. Motherlode's not right now, but we got Waycrest Manor. Let's get it.
Yeah, so we have 40K actually already played this dungeon earlier against Method U, and they had such a clean run. We didn't, we were wondering about Method U as they were playing a little bit of a weird comp, but 40K on the other side, they were having a super clean run. I do think they had 4 deaths, but all of those deaths that they had didn't cost them a lot of time at all. Abra played this dungeon as well yesterday, but it wasn't as fast as 40K's run. So we'll see what those two teams come up with here this time around, as their comps are very similar. Both of them playing that Mistweaver, but 40K is having the Demon Hunter, which is really working out great for those teams because of the bursting affix.
I mean, and I like the comp that 40K is running. We first saw this comp from Method NA 2 weekends ago in West Cup 2, where you, instead of running the Resto Druid, you have the Mistweaver Monk, of course, because they just kind of are a better MDI healer in general. They can do their damage and healing at the same time. And on top of that, they just have a lot of individual toolkits, like with Way of the Crane as well. They do a lot of burst damage and healing, so that's great as well. But they have the Unholy DK for their battle res, and then they have the Demon Hunter as well. Just, they're a solid class in general. They can do self-healing, which lets them live through those bursting stacks on their own. They bring the Darkness to dodge bursting stacks as well. And they're just a solid class in general. They have a lot of magic defense as well. They're just a good class, and not to mention, they buff the Unholy DK's damage, which is just a slight buff as well. There's just a lot going for this particular comp in Waycrest Manor that I like to see.
Yeah, they really just enabled their melee comp even more by just bringing this physical damage buff. And as you mentioned, Way of the Crane making those huge pulls even possible. In this dungeon specifically, because of the bursting, Way of the Crane just being able to heal through a lot of bursting stacks is such a huge cooldown that he can use. And then on top of that, it enables those huge pulls as well, because you want to do the huge pulls with the Unholy, but the Resto Druid not quite healing well enough to go through all of those huge bursting stacks and all of this insane damage that is coming out of the trash. Now 40K and both Abra using their Bloodlust here as they pull trash on top of the boss, on top of the Triad. Both of them downing Solema, and they also have a Captain and a Guard on top, which does so much tank damage, so they want to make sure that Divine Field and Rentari stay alive.
Yep, similar pull strategies we saw from that Method EU 40K match. Of course, 40K doing the same strategy we saw where they pulled both trash packs on top of the boss. But Abrakeydabra also opting to do that exact same strategy, and we almost saw an Ascension Ritual go off from that Acolyte. If that happened, it would have turned into one of those witches that we see spawn throughout the dungeon, which is not what you want to have to deal with on this boss. Fortunately, it was kicked. They didn't have it get off, but that would have been pretty disastrous if it did go off. It would have been something you hate to see for Abrakeydabra. That being said, 40K dealing with the trash pack that much quicker, probably about 10 seconds faster than Abrakeydabra on their first boss kill plus trash percentage, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see just about almost exactly the same strategies coming out from both teams. Both probably heading into this courtyard here pretty soon to deal, and they'll deal with the Jagged Hounds first, and then they'll go on to deal with the bigger pull right after that. It wouldn't surprise me to see a lot of personal cooldowns, maybe even the Darkness coming out from Lazel here.
Yeah, the Darkness definitely favorable for those huge pulls here. You can rotate your cooldowns, right? You can rotate Darkness first for huge bursting stacks, and you can do Way of the Crane for another huge pull. So definitely big cooldowns coming in for 40K here to survive the bursting stacks, as both of those teams deal with the Jagged Hounds. So both of them doing the exact same pulls here until right now. And you see how low they drop from those bursting stacks. Lazel holding on to the Darkness for this next pull, where they are going to pull a lot of the mobs on top of this Void-Touched Emissary. So there's so many Thorn Shapers here. You're going to see a lot of infected Thorns being casted. So the Mistweavers want to be sure that they dispel the right targets here.
Yeah, but you see a lot of damage coming out. That was a 4-stack of the bursting going on in the group on top of 2 or 3 infected Thorn debuffs, like you mentioned at the same time. We didn't see the Darkness come out just yet, and unfortunately both Rentari and Curry going down. It's going to be a full group wipe. It looks like they didn't quite kill that Void-Touched Emissary in time, and they ended up taking a lot of residual group damage. Just a pretty disastrous full wipe from them. It just fell apart at the last second.
Yeah, this was just this one Void-Touched cast that went off, and I mean, Lazel was holding on to this Darkness because it was not supposed to go through this cast. He was supposed to hold the Darkness for the bursting stacks afterwards for the mobs, right? So I can't blame Lazel for not using it there. It might have saved them, but in the end, that's not what they planned on doing. They really wanted to have enough damage to finish off the Void-Touched Emissary before the cast comes out, and they just barely didn't have enough. And now Abra having a lot of trouble too, as Smok goes down while he got hit by the Thorn by Soulbound Goliath, and they're actually resetting, interestingly enough, because they had everyone back alive, so maybe they could have salvaged the pull, but they decided on resetting anyway.
That was scary. Ashine got the battle res off at 16% HP, got the infected Thorn buff, went from 16% to 8% HP in the first global from Zamak when he came alive, was to dispel that Thorn. Another tick of that would have taken Ashine down. Just perfect GCD usage from both players there. There was only one decision to make it, but this is figuring out the decision is the hardest part of this. Being able to make those clutch plays at the last second is what you want to see from those teams, and it was good from Zamak to pull that off. They didn't have to reset the pull because of it. Ashine is with the group, so good to see there. Abrakeydabra is in the driver's seat here as we see them pull a lot of this hallway, a lot of these devouring maggots into that Void-Touched Emissary. There's going to be a lot of spit debuffs coming out on the group here.
Yeah, so they're in combat now, so they decided instead of just going on the Thorn Shapers and finishing them off, they pull it on top of this Void Touched Emissary. So they do have to do a little bit of a different route here, a different pull pattern because of the reset on the boss that they had to do because of the death on Smog. But now they can go back to doing the boss once they're out of combat here, finished off those maggots. They can have Smog sit down and drink. He also did proc his staff, unfortunately enough, but it's just a problem because he has been rest and then he has been in combat this whole time, so he never had time to sit down and drink. But now we're going to see another pull by the Rogues here as they will pull the mini-boss to the right side. You see Dr. J off there in the top right corner, and then we'll see Smog pull the boss and get it onto Divine Field.
Yeah, I think the staff is just like, for a lot of these dungeons, I feel like, and I think we talk about it quite a lot. Whoa, Dr. J just randomly dying when they pull Soulbound on Goliath. Fortunately for them, they don't commit anything to the pull. This is just going to be a boss reset, and they're going to go ahead have to reset that back. But it looks like Dr. J was the rogue that was supposed to pull both Matron Brindle and the Jagged Hounds to the side, and he died during it. Didn't quite see what he died to. I'm not sure if it was explosives or if he just got hit through. You can't get hit through repost, so that's not what it is. Fortunately for them, they have a second rogue. Swagstep can do it himself with his repost once the boss respawns here. That's just going to be a time loss. The res plus the boss reset, maybe 30 seconds or so on the board for them. It's not the best, but also it's probably the easiest form of wipe you can have as a group, and Swagstep should be able to pull this off. Hopefully they don't get bad RNG with explosives.
Yeah, but this is the second time they had to reset Goliath, and at this point, this is the opening that 40k needs, right? I mean, they're 10% behind in trash at this point, but sometimes that doesn't mean anything, right? Because if it doesn't cost you one extra trash pull, if you can just get this 10% on top of something else that you would have pulled anyway, then they're not actually far behind at all. And they're already on the boss here. They are on 54%. They're still behind in deaths, so there's 15 seconds in favor of Abra. But Abra definitely needs to stop making those kind of mistakes, else they'll fall even further behind. As 40k is dealing with Goliath, there's still trash that they can pull on top of the boss, which we've seen from groups before, where they will just go inside those rooms to the left and to the right and just gather some mobs up and pull it on top. We'll see if they decide to do so.
Yep, we'll have to keep an eye on that. Usually we see them pull, like you mentioned, a pack of those captains inside that moon marker you see on the door there. They'll usually pull that group in, but it looks like they're opting to pull the Emissary of the Tides in, plus those two Coven Thorn Shapers in front of Matron Brindle. Have to make sure they get the Infected Thorn kicks off as well, but they just let one go through because I guess they can just dispel it with the Mistweaver Monk, but the next one they'll definitely want to make sure they kick so they don't get any extra damage on the group. And as I say that, they just let the uproot through. All right, there's a Tides Emissary. They can't interrupt it. Haha. Once again, idiot caster. That's me. Yeah. The problem here is they've got the Soul Fetish going off, and well, there's nothing for the Soul Fetish to move to, so it's not that big of a deal actually at all. So there's not going to be too big of a problem. They'll just be able to cleave this down with Soulbound Goliath.
Yeah, so Abra, they're working Goliath now as well. They're in 36%. Smog's dropping quite low here as he's struggling, and he also get the Thorn cast on him. Unfortunately, really bad RNG here with the Thorn cast. The very first time when Smog went down, I believe it was also the Thorn cast on him. So definitely a little bit unlucky here. Maybe he wouldn't have wiped, wouldn't have died the very first time. But again, you just gotta think about this. So when they reset the boss on the very first time, it was because Smog died, but Ashine actually rested him back up, and they would have been fine, I feel like. I mean, it was a safety call, right, to reset the boss anyway, but in the end, maybe if they wouldn't have reset the boss, maybe they would have managed to finish it off, and it wouldn't have cost them so much time. But it's really a split decision making where, you know, you just have to make a call, and it was probably Divine Field saying, you know what, I'm just going to reset this. And then you can't really doubt your decision anymore. You just have to stick to a call and do it. And in the end, it worked out for them. That's the down Goliath. Now, 40k, they're already on their next pull. They also deal with this Void-Touched Emissary that Abra already dealt with. So it's still really close between those two, really.
We've seen a lot of wipes in this hallway for a lot of teams, and Abrakeydabra is going for an absolutely massive pull where they're going to LOS everything around the sideway. We have to keep an eye on those spit debuffs on the players. See two of them on Smog, two of them on Ashhead, both absolutely getting chunked by these debuffs. Can Smog stay alive? He's dropping so low, but it looks like he's kind of fixed the problem. They're definitely stabilizing this pull, and the Unholy DK plus the two rogues that are keeping up with the Unholy DK are kind of killing everything, but Divine Field's going down. They just got their second battle res available in the dungeon. Ashen's going to use it to try to keep the pull alive. They have the Ring of Peace to make sure nothing hits anyone while Divine Field is regaining that aggro. And man, that was dangerous, but they're just barely pulling it off. And I think that pull is going to put them ahead in the dungeon. But that being said, Fourty is also going for the exact same pull on their side. We're going to have to see if they're able to pull it off. You can see there are 8 spit debuffs spread out across the group right now, 3 of them on Lazo right now, but that's probably the most fortunate scenario because Demon Hunters can kind of just self-leech themselves through it. But the massive amount of healing required from Igloo, you can see 125 HPS, but looks like the Unholy DK was able to get a little bit more of that pie on the side of 40k. He was able to really do a lot more damage on his side and kind of make sure that those maggots all got instantly killed for them.
Yeah, this is the strength of the Mystery Verse we've been talking about with Way of the Crane, just healing so much, having this huge burst AoE healing come out. So insane to be able to survive these kind of pulls. That's not something a Rastadru could do. They can't burst as much HP as a Mystery Verse can in this kind of situation. So that's why we see those Mystery Verse come in Wakecrest specifically, especially when you have those bursting affixes. Now, one thing to note is that LaSalle was holding on to this darkness this whole time. Even though the whole group dropped incredibly low, there were lots of spit debuffs everywhere, lots of bursting stacks, and this is really just because they planned another pretty big pull, and that's when they want to use their darkness once the cooldowns from Igloo are down. Now, Abrakeydabra, they're in 60% trash now, so Abra's still ahead at this point, but there's still a way for 40k to catch up, and that we've seen them play this dungeon before, and they had a really clean run before.
These guys are doing absolute mirror pulls. They're doing almost the exact same pulls in this dungeon. It's almost like they have the exact same MD2 route. I'm actually curious to see if we can keep look an eye on that later, but doing the exact same pull route, 3 packs into the boss for Abrakeydabra, and I'd imagine the reason that Ashine didn't do that much damage on that pull is because he was saving his cooldowns, most of his offensive cooldowns, for this pull on the boss so he can absolutely pop off and do a lot of damage to Brawl. Usually, in previous cups, especially in the spring season, we saw teams commit their bloodlust to this pull because it was a tyrannical boss, had a lot of HP, and they really wanted to make sure they get it down. But because the trash in this room isn't necessarily that dangerous and we're on that fortified affix, they're just going to let the Unholy DK do work here. He'll easily be able to deal with all of this trash pretty much on his own.
Yeah, so I really hope that Abra doesn't forget about their Bloodlust again. The last time around, they used their second Bloodlust at the very end of the last boss without, it was like 50% on the boss or something like that. Either they had a very interesting strategy where they were waiting for Ashine's army to come back up, or they literally just forgot about using that Bloodlust. So we'll see what Abra does with it later on. Hopefully they don't forget, as 40k is also doing this exact same pull that we just saw Abra doing, but Kurisu is going down on his DK, and that's a huge problem because he's the one with the battle rest, so there's no way of them to get him back up. They do have 2 battle rests available, but without them having the rest to do it, DK the only one with the rest, so this is going to cost them a lot of time if they want to finish off this boss with only 2 damage dealers. Thankfully, most of the trash was already down, but because Kurisu got his damage out, but the boss the boss still has a lot of HP left.
Unfortunately, when you are dead, you cannot battle res yourself, and for some reason, Curry isn't following the #1 rule of every single PvE encounter, which is get the enemy's HP to 0 before yours reaches that. Unfortunate to see for them. They're going to have to finish off 44% of Raul without one of their DPS. It's going to take them a little bit extra time, probably an extra 30 seconds or so to finish this boss off without that Unholy DK. Now, of course, he doesn't have any of his cooldowns available anymore. You can see that he's probably still going to finish the encounter at top DPS, but the fact that you have to single target the rest of this boss without 1 DPS is going to cost them a lot of time, and Abrakeydabra is going to be able to extend their lead. And you can see these teams are doing the exact same pulls. They're at the same trash percentage. They're doing the same pulls into the bosses. They're just doing the exact same thing. It wouldn't surprise me to see the exact same snap pull come from 40k. I think there's a very good chance that they saw the J. Cross Manor strategy come out from Abrakeydabra, and they're like, you know what, we like that. We're going to go ahead and take that from you.
Yeah, we definitely saw 40k do this exact same pull earlier as well, so there's no doubt that they're going to try to do the same thing as we just see from Abra. Now, what happened there was that one of the rogues tricks the tank, Divine Field. They went off to the living room area, to this Hunter Lodge area, and just tricks all of those mobs on top of the tank. Now, because they were standing on this bench there, and there was no path available for the mobs to normally walk to the tank, it did snap. So that's how most of those teams managed to do these kind of pulls where all of the mobs teleport to the tank. This is the snapping that we talk about. And there's lots of new snapping positions that the teams constantly figure out and show on those kind of tournaments and the runs that we are seeing. And it's really nice to see that teams are still trying to figure out new ways on doing these like very interesting pulls and very difficult pulls as well. Because these kind of survivalists and the hunter area, we've seen teams pull them before without snapping, and there's so many things that went wrong there. Teams wiping, having full team wipes, because cast went through and so many things going wrong. So good on them to figure out a new way onto dealing with this.
Yeah, I mean, Abrakeydabra, they're moving ahead very quickly. Unfortunately, they didn't quite get their skip off perfectly here. It looks like they pulled an extra bit of trash through with them. Fortunately, there's nothing too big, and they're able to just cleave it down on top of that Thorn Shaper. So I'm actually not sure if that was a snap that they did with Transcendence, or if it was something they did on purpose. I'm curious to see if Tettles has an explanation for that, because I honestly have no clue what just happened. But they're definitely way over trash percentage. That can't have been on purpose from them. It looks like that was the trash right beside the door next to the kitchen staircase that they would normally just completely skip. So that's not normally what you see from teams. Unfortunately for 40K, during their skip, Curry goes down to a multitude of spit debuffs. Also not what you want to see. It looks like Rentari might go down too. He's taking a lot of damage from that Void-touched Emissary down there, and Lazel's also in combat and going down. Fortunately, it looks like Igloo was able to get a Shadow Meld off, so he's going to be able to AoE res everyone here. But, I mean, that was just scary for a second there. I mean, both of these teams not having a good time with the skips. Abrakeydabra, of course, able to deal with theirs a little bit more efficiently. But they're also... This is really weird from Abrakeydabra. They're opting to not pull trash into the boss, which is what we see from pretty much every team that goes fast in this dungeon.
Yeah, this is a really difficult skip. We've seen multiple teams have problems with this. There's no way you can't shroud past it because there's a Void-touched Emissary, which with True Side. So the only way for you to go past this is to use your Shadow Meld and just get aggro from everything, run through and Shadow Meld. But because there's a lot of maggots and the Void-touched Emissary doing all of these AoE casts, and you saw it on Kurisu, he got 3 spit casts from the maggots, which is a complete RNG, and there's no way of him surviving that. So him going down there causing some problems. Now 40K, this might be the chance for them to catch up, because they're the ones who pulled the trash on top of the boss, which is something Abra didn't do. They were just going slower. Maybe they thought they're ahead enough to be able to play this safe, and therefore they pulled the trash alone. But now 40K doing this pull that Abra didn't do, and also committing their Bloodlust. I don't know what Abra is saving their Bloodlust for, really. I mean, unless they're pulling the Gloom Horrors on top of the last boss, it really doesn't seem like a good usage anymore for it compared to some of the other pulls that they did before.
And you can see with the Bloodlust plus the Unholy DK AoE on top of the boss, that cleave damage, they're already one full phase of the boss ahead of Abrakeydabra. Oh, almost one full phase. They're a little bit, not quite one full, but I'd say about 2/3 of a phase ahead of Abrakeydabra. Of course, the way this fight works, every single time Lord Waycrest gets down to 30% HP, Lady Waycrest will sacrifice a portion of her health to heal Lord Waycrest back to full. She'll do that 3 times, and once she reaches 10% HP, she'll come down and join the fight, and you'll have to cleave both of them down at the same time to finish the encounter. Of course, 40K has now reached that part of the phase where they're cleaving both Lady and Lord Waycrest down, and they'll want to get as many of those kicks on Racking Cord as possible whenever Rentaro doesn't have the Spell Reflect available, of course. But I mean, they've just absolutely chewed through this boss, and they're a solid, solid half a phase ahead of Abrakeydabra, I'd say. Abrakeydabra has pretty much normalized and caught up a pretty decent amount. But the main difference for both of these teams is that Abrakeydabra still has their Bloodlust available, and on top of that, 40K has 5 extra deaths on the board. It looks like Abrakeydabra is gearing up to do this Gloom Horror pull into Gartul, where a lot could go wrong if your healer doesn't quite get in the right spot. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. This could be incredibly dangerous for them.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's still going to be a close fight, but Abra definitely in the lead here. With not only do they have the Bloodlust ready, but Ashine also saving his army this whole time. He was not using it at all. He was waiting for them to use the Bloodlust on the last boss. Kurisu did use his, so there's no way they're going to out DPS Abra on the last boss. We see now 40K downing the boss. They're running through to the last boss, Shadow Melting off the aggro. Actually, oh no, they're pulling the Gloom Horrors on top. So this is what 40K has to pull off to be able to win here. So if they pull off this Gloom Horror pull and Abra doesn't do it, then there's definitely the 40K advantage here.
Oh, there we go. Both teams pulling off the Femclap strategy. They're using the Ring of Peace actually from Zmok. Are they gonna? They don't have Shadow Meld available, so there's no way they're just gonna let them come down. But this gives them extra time to set up the pull. Zmok will be able to get into position to pull this off. He'll be able to make it so that none of those charges actually go on him as well. So this is a perfect setup from them. And oh, Zmok goes down actually to Deathless Slaver. They have a battle res. Well, they don't have a battle res for another probably looks like 45 seconds from them. I'm not sure how they're going to live through this. Ashine has to somehow get through all these Gloom Horrors, but how are they going to live through the bursting stacks?
Yeah, I don't think there's a way for them to go through. I mean, you have the Cloak available on Dr. J, but Swagstep doesn't have it. Ashine might be able to survive it with AMS, but Divine Field, how is Divine Field going to survive? There's no way Divine Field is just going to go down as the Gloom Horrors do so much damage onto the tank. This is going to be a full team wipe coming in for Abra. What a disaster for them. They did save the Bloodlust all the way up until this point to make this pull happen, but Smok just having arrow from the Slaver, just not getting the taunt from Divine Field or a tricks from, or a grip, anything really. There's so many things they could have done to prevent this death from Smog happening. 40k also having trouble as Quercy goes down. Again, unfortunately, the DK is the one that goes down, and they don't have a battle rest to get him back up. They have 3 rests, but because it's the DK, there's no way of them to get it back up. Now, they still have a lot of slavers alive, actually. There's 3 of them, so they didn't really burn them properly. They can still finish this off, but Eagle is so low on mana as he had to deal with all of those bursting stats coming off from the Gloom Horrors. So they need to make sure that they finish off these slavers and actually burn them properly, because else they might still cause a wipe here.
I mean, Igloo is completely like you mentioned. There's nothing he can do to heal the group right now, and they have to make sure that they're somehow making sure these slavers don't get into their cast off. This is not completely over yet with that DPS dead. Abrakeydabra and 40k now are on exactly equal death counts, so if any of these teams has any further deaths, it will completely solidify their wipes on this boss, and the other team will win. So somehow, even after a full team wipe on the final boss where they commit their bloodlust, they commit their army of the dead, they're still not done in this dungeon. And on top of that, Abrakeydabra now has a battle res available again, so somehow they might still have a chance to take this dungeon.
I mean, only 40k wipes somehow, right?
Sure.
They're 17%, and as you mentioned, Eagle completely out of mana, but they dealt with the slavers now. They only have 1 slaver alive, so all they have to do is finish off the boss. I very highly doubt that they can wipe anymore at this point, just because they dealt with the slavers. Eagle has a little bit of mana back. It's on 6%, but yeah, what a close game. It was looking like Abra is ahead this whole time, and then they just don't manage to do this Gloom Horror pull at the very end.
And like we mentioned before the dungeon, Jack, this Motherload coming up, 40k, is completely at home here. That has to be something in the back of Abrakeedabra's spine.
That's got to be a big sigh of relief for 40k, but as you mentioned, Abra's got to be a little bit more worried about this Motherload coming up, because 40k has a lot of time spent on. We've already seen them play it in competition twice. They already had the dominant time and time trials for it. And they're right at home with it, Tettles.
Yeah, but that Waycrest manner was rough from both teams. Oh,
that was not J-Crest manner that we've come to know and love.
That was a slugfest between both teams. It started off decent. Both teams did fine on the Heartsbane Triad, and nothing was really insane. Obviously, pulling trash into it can be pretty dangerous with these bewitched captains and their cleave, but overall, it's an okay pull from both teams. Nothing is really dangerous. And then you got 40k wiping to Queen's Decree Hide, not taking the advice there. That second cast ends up going off right as that Void Emissary is teleporting away, and it just causes Kuri and the tank to end up going down, because it does so much percentage health, because it's really hard to be able to tank packs while you have that going on. Abrakeydabra has some issues of their own on Soulbound Goliath, having to reset it, and then they pull off this pull into Raw, and I honestly thought that it was going to be over, but then for some reason Abra doesn't do this pull inside of Lord and Lady Waycrest's room, where they're pulling all the trash into the boss, but I don't know, but they don't pull off the correct pull inside of Lord and Lady Waycrest's room, where they pull all the trash into the boss, which we saw from 40k, and then they ended up having a wipe, and that was just pretty much it, all she wrote.
It was indeed. So they're Abra's really gonna have to buckle down onto this one, because 40k is, you guys have been mentioning all the time, Motherload is gonna be their home. So we'll be going into a game at 3. But let's take a quick break first before we go into it, as we decide who is beating Method NA in the grand finals. The series is tied 1-1 between 40k and Abrakeydabra, as Motherload is our next dungeon, and was just an amazing run for 40k. But let's keep in mind, let's keep this in context, ironic. 40k still hasn't had their runs quite match up to their time trials just yet. So if Abrakeydabra is running their game and they're playing just at the same level as their time trials, they could take this.
Well, yeah, the time trial time that Abrakeydabra has in here is that 16:22 that we saw on the screen right now, and I think the time we saw from 40k in the previous match was something like 16:25. So
30,
these
yeah,
guys are like
that.
neck and neck in how fast they go. And Abrakeydabra is the team that kind of premiered the double unholy DK in this dungeon, so it makes sense that, you know, we can't say 40k is going to win, but man, they've looked at home in here in their previous matches this week.
That's true, and that's another thing that's really important, is how much these teams are practicing some of their dungeons and some of their expectations, right? If 40k has a good idea that they're going to wind up in the lower bracket at some point, and they say, well, we're going to be playing multiple different Motherloads. That's got to be a big confidence boost for them to grow if they're practicing it, winning every single time that they play on it, and now this is their round 3.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, in the end, this win matters more to Abra Abra in theory, because Abra still has something to gain for the points for BlizzCon seeding, right? They need the ones who need to end up beating Method NA to get the second seed over them. Well, 40K, they're the 4th seed. There's no way they can get a 3rd one, right? So 40K has a good spot for BlizzCon. It's still, it's just for honor to win this higher cup and also get more prize money, of course, in this cup, but there's more on the line for Abra. So in theory, they're the ones who need to be more practiced, and they're the ones who need to be motivated to win the series here.
Not only that, we've kind of been, slamming into this entire cup, this entire summer cup. More, I think for them, it's just got to be a self-confidence booster to get their best finish ever in cup play. So I'm really interested to see how they're able to play. The pressure's on the line. This is the 3rd time we've seen Motherload from them this weekend. They've got to commit here. They've got to have a fantastic run in order to beat Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so we see both of them immediately stealthing, which is something we've seen almost all of the time here. Almost all the teams are skipping this first trash here just because they don't want to deal with all of those different mobs at all. And now we're probably going to see a Bloodlust from both of those teams as they gather up this huge pool. As you can see, 40K already popping their Bloodlust before all of the mobs are even in. And Abra now popping their Bloodlust as well. You see, unfortunately, there's a cast that went off on an Assassin. That's why Divanfield has all of those poison stacks on top of him. And you see the whole group dropping so low. But as soon as the DKs ramp up their damage, those mobs are just going to die immediately. Wolf Disco unfortunately going down before he can do all of his damage. You can see Kurisu doing a lot more, but hopefully they can still finish this off.
And the thing that I was going to point out here, I can still point it out, so I'm going to point it out, is that the problem 40K has had with this first pull, even though they've been melting all of that small trash, the dangerous trash, and it might be more consistent to do it that way, from other teams, especially No Girls Allowed, if they were able to finish off their strategy, they would have beaten 40K in this dungeon because of how clean they were on this first pull. And it looks like Abrakeydabra is more clean. All of their Peacekeepers are sub 10% at this point, while 40K still has 2 Peacekeepers alive, and one of them is at like 30 or 40%. It looks like they kind of do their AoE a little bit too early before all the Peacekeepers are perfectly stacked up, and it just takes them longer to do the pull that way. That being said, it is a little bit of a bigger pull. They get 29% instead of 28%, but Abrakeydabra is already setting up their second pull while 40K is still running to it. It's just, this is 3 times in this dungeon now where it seems like that's probably the defining factor in what made their 15:54 run in time trials. Probably just those Peacekeepers at the start saved them the 20-30 seconds alone.
Yeah, and then Abra, I mean, definitely not having any sort of issues here in the first pull. And if you look at the buffs, at the defensive and offensive cooldowns here that you can see below the player frames and the group frames all the way in the top, all of the, whenever there's a huge pull as the first one that we saw from both of those teams, the DKs and the rogues and everyone is just using their defenses preemptively. That's something we don't see that often. Usually you want to use it reactively in case something happens, or in order because there's some sort of AoE ability happening. But because of those trash packs, they're so scary, and you don't really know which target the fuck is going to charge to. Therefore, they just use all of their defenses preemptively and hope they just brute force through those kind of pulls basically with their double DKs, and hope they don't get hit by any of the abilities once their defensives are down, or at least they hope the trash is dead once their defensives are down. Now Abra finished off their second pull already. They're on 50%, while 40K just a little bit behind. They're now on 48% once they finished off this Peacekeeper.
I want to say that was absolutely beautiful from Abrakeydabra. Those 3 Peacekeepers all died like half a second after each other, and we got a beautiful shot of all 3 dying in the same small line. Love to see that. And at the same time, Abrakeydabra halfway done with their trash after 2 pulls. Just goes to show how perfectly they have this dungeon mapped out. And it looks like Abrakeydabra is going for more of a No Girls Allowed strategy, where they get to about 65-66% trash before they deal with the first boss, whereas we know from 40K, it's the 3rd time we've seen it this weekend, they like pulling their 3rd pull on top of coin-operated crowd pummeler and let the DKs do their work. After this first static pulse, they'll pop their army in the dead, and they'll start going in on the boss here. We'll see how quickly they're going to be able to pull this boss. If I remember properly, we'll probably see them kill the boss by about the time Abrakeydabra starts pulling, if it's anywhere similar to what No Girls Allowed. I mean, all of these teams are so practice in their strategies that it wouldn't surprise me to see similar things from Abrakeydabra that we saw from No Girls Allowed.
Yeah, this is so funny too, because each team is seeing some strats from another team and taking something here and there, and then it all just shapes up to be one whole strategy. Like the best strategy in each dungeon is just multiple small things that come from each team, right? And they just all add it up together to have one beautiful strategy. Now this thing that 40K is doing with pulling this trash pack on top of coin-operated crowd pummeler, that's actually something that Abrakeydabra did the very first time. They were the first team to pull this trash pack on top of the first boss, which is what Abrakeydabra is doing right now as well. So 40K definitely took this from Abra, and this is a very difficult pull as well, just because not only do you have to deal with the boss and all of the frontals that are happening, but you also have to deal with the huge area of denial that the Peacekeeper constantly casts in this fight.
Yeah, but this is almost exactly the same as what happened with No Girls Allowed. A little bit less trash percentage from Abrakeydabra, but because they're pulling trash on top of the boss, they're probably going to be at about the exact same trash percentage. And of course, we know Abrakeedabra's pull style is going to be the exact same thing 40k does. They'll do the hot butter pull, as we've coined it for some reason. I think that's a stupid name, but we're kind of committed to it at this point because we've said it for the past 2 weekends. So yeah, that strategy, and then of course they go to the extractor pull afterwards, where they'll cleave those 4 extractors, shadow meld the rest of the trash off afterwards, and then they'll be on to Azarok after that. Unfortunately for Abrakeydabra, Ashine does go down on the boss. They have a battle res available for him. That'll be their only one for the next 4.5 minutes, so not having that on the board for the next trash pull. Problem with that trash pull is if one of your Unholy DK goes down, like we saw from No Girls Allowed, the pull's pretty much over at that point. You need both of your Unholy DKs alive to finish off that pull and the time where your tank can stay alive, because there's just so much trash and there's so much residual tank damage going out. He's not going to live that long. 40k gearing up for this big pull.
Yeah, Smok actually having some trouble to heal the Grievous away on everybody. We haven't really talked about the Grievous affix yet, but you can see how a lot of people have 4 stacks in Abra's group here, as he had to travel to catch up with healing, had to rest a Shine because he died during the fight. So lots of travel. Divine Field actually going down too. Now the boss is on 10%, so there might be a way of them finishing it off, but not having a tank. Well, there's so much damage coming in. The Peacekeeper still alive too. There's the parry, the repulse coming of Dr. J, but I'm not completely sure if they can finish this off.
This is scary for sure. Smok is going to have to kite this around, but I'm not sure if they have enough. He's pumping everything he can. Concentrated Flame. I think that went to the Dr. J, actually. Looks like it went into the boss. 4% on the board. If they're able to get these foot bombs in to make the boss take extra damage, I'm not sure how they're going to kick them in. This is normally the healer's job. Static Pulse coming out as he was going to kick the foot bomb in. They have to get these into the boss, or they are going to die to the residual damage. Boss is taking extra damage, and he will go down, but man, that was scary. The important thing about killing the boss is at this point, they're allowed to release. They set a checkpoint for themselves. Divine Field can res and taunt that Peacekeeper to make sure no one dies, and boy, that was scary for Abrakeydabra. Even though they're able to pull it off somehow, they're still down 3 deaths to 40k's 1 death on their board, so they're going to have to do this trash here perfectly. They're still in the dungeon. There wasn't a wipe. They're still in the dungeon for sure. But man, that was scary.
Yeah, that was so well done by them to be able to still finish this off. You saw Smok there just kiting the boss and using that Lightfoot potion to gain some extra speed. The boss was getting so close to him, so good on him to be able to just use the speed potion and get the pull off. But this is a huge pull coming in by Abra. This is what we've seen by No Girls Allowed, actually, as you mentioned before. But No Girls Allowed actually having a full team wipe here, not being able to pull it off. Now let's see if Abra can do that without any sort of rests. They do have both of the DKs doing an insane amount of damage, as you see Swag and now a Shine as well, but Swag dropping very low. They did manage to recover, and all of the defensives are being popped by the DKs just to be able to survive this pull.
I mean, Swag kind of proved me wrong. I said you needed both DKs to do this pull, but Swag probably could have done that on his own. He was he was ascending for a long time, and Ashine's like, you know what? Yeah, I'll help you out a little bit after the fact, just for a little bit of extra damage. But I mean, Swag probably could have finished that off on his own. Now, of course, they only have these 4 extractors left to deal with. They would like to kill them all at the same time, but it doesn't really need to happen. Of course, they'll be able to cleave the Fanatical Driller out as well, but they're probably not going to focus too much damage on them. Once these extractors go down, they'll probably knock them away and then go on to Shadow Meld them off, because they're at the trash percentage they need at this point. They really only need to pull the Taskmaster Ascari pack on top of the boss, plus maybe some of the Stone Gazers, and they'll finish their trash off.
Yeah, this is the one thing that Abra needed to do to be able to catch up to 40k here. Now, because they did this whole pull in 1 compared to 40k doing it in 2 pulls, they're actually the ones who are going to reach the boss first. There's still going to be a 10-second difference between those 2 teams in favor of 40k because of those differences. But yeah, both of the teams actually engaging Taskmaster Ascari here as well. So we'll see. Yeah, this is such a close game now. It's just all going to be about boss damage at this point. Once they finish off this mini boss here and the trash around it, then it's really only going to be the 3 bosses left.
Yep, there you go. They're kind of setting up to make sure Rentari has enough aggro so that when they get to the boss and the Holy DKs kind of start doing their AoE damage, they won't rip any aggro as well. So a little bit of safety coming out from 40k there as well. Actually, they might have been waiting for the cover cooldown. It's something like that as well. So once the cover comes out, they'll be able to cleave everything down on top of Taskmaster Ascari. That would make more sense to me, honestly. But yeah, you can just see the Unholy DKs. They're just going ahead, doing their thing. Wolf Disco's having the time of his life right now. No fixates on him, so he doesn't have to worry about anything. However, Curry has a 9 stack of that bleed. He's getting chunked for 60% of HP every single time that ticks. Somehow, Igloo's keeping him alive. That'll be the final tick, and wow, I mean, that was impressive. This is a grievous affix. He's taking extra damage on top of that, and he was able to heal through that. That was so scary.
Kurisu must really hate his healer as he just, just gets the 9 stacks. But Ashine, unfortunately, not so lucky. He probably hated his healer too, but Smok was saying, you know what? I'm not going to heal your 9 stacks. Unfortunately, they don't have a battle rest ready on Abra's side. They will be ready in a couple of seconds. You can see the cooldown coming up here, but this is going to cost them quite a bit, man. So unfortunate for Abra again, as they were just about to catch up to 40k, but now having the staff on Ashine here. I don't know what to say. It's probably, again, just having the fixates on them not kiting it properly. And it's also a little bit unlucky to have 3 or 4 fixates on a DK, because DK is not as mobile as, your rogue would be. But still, just having it go up to this high stacks, you just need to play it a little bit more safe, because what is a death that DK gonna do, right? So you'd rather just do a little bit less damage when you kite the Earth Ragers and you just don't die, right?
I mean, you got to feel a little bad for Abrakeydabra with what's going on for them here, because they've looked so good this entire tournament. They've been playing incredibly well. Like we mentioned, I think earlier on yesterday, they almost seemed like they had like a chip on their shoulder, because they didn't really. A lot of people felt like the way they won last week wasn't really becoming of a team that wins a cup, and it was a little bit unfortunate, the occurrences that happened to them, but they didn't end up winning, and that's not the way you really want to win a tournament. So it looked like they were coming in this week and saying, you know what, we want to win and we want to look fantastic while doing so, and they were looking fantastic the entire tournament. But then, at the last second, this is going on. They're having these tiny little mistakes, and if it keeps going on like this for the rest of the dungeon, we don't see anything happening to 40k, they're going to once again finish in that 3rd position that we see them finishing so many times before.
Yeah, and 40k, I mean, they're really showing up. I mean, they had this 1 death in this dungeon, but outside of that, not really any sort of problems compared to 40k, just losing so much time with their 4 deaths that they had. It really always depends on where you're going to die, right? Sometimes a death doesn't really cost you much at all. You only lose to 5 seconds, and sometimes you have to 4-mana boss fight because you don't have any battle rests left. So this is really the difference here. As 40k does engage Rixa Flax Flame, they also pull the War Machine on top to get the last percentage that they need here, while Abra already has the 100%. So there's definitely a chance that Abra has a lot more single target damage here and can catch up again, just because 40k needs to also cleave down the trash here. So it definitely means that they could, in theory, lose single target damage if they focus on the trash too much. But 40k also popping their Bloodlust here, and Abra is probably saving it for the last boss.
Yeah, of course, once again, slight differences in strategies here, where we know Abrakeydabra likes to get 100% trash percentage before they even move on to the 3rd boss of the dungeon, whereas, as we've seen multiple times from 40k this week, they like pulling that War Machine on top of Rixa Flux Flame, using their Army of the Deads from both Unholy DKs on top of Bloodlust to cleave everything down and get a whole bunch of nice cleave in on the boss. So it's interesting to see them side by side, just different strategies. It looks like they're almost kind of neck and neck in terms of strategies, because Abrakeydabra did engage Rixa Flux Flame about 20% after 40k, and of course they're going to be able to do a little bit more boss damage because they don't have to worry about doing any cleave damage. But of course, once the War Machine goes down and 40k is at 100% trash, they'll be able to kind of match the single target damage that Abrakeydabra is putting out as well. Now, looking at the cooldowns, both Unholy DKs do have their Army of the Deads available, it looks like, so they didn't use them on this boss, so they'll have those available for the final boss along with Bloodlust, but I'm not sure at this point, especially with the Death Timers, it's going to be enough for them to come back here.
Yeah, maybe it would be enough without the death difference, but those 15 seconds are probably going to matter a lot in the last boss. Now, the only difference, as you mentioned, is the double army plus the Bloodlust, while 40k only has 1 army on Wolf Disco. Kurisu actually did use it here in this boss in addition to the Bloodlust. Now, we'll see how 40k does pull off this skip. Now, usually we don't really see teams have any sort of problems with this skip here. It's not too dangerous. You just run all the way up and use your Shadow Meld at the end. There's not that many things that can go wrong here compared to like a skip in Wakecrest where you have those maggots casting spit on random targets. So usually not huge problems here. The Grievous can cause some problems, but outside of that it really shouldn't be a big deal, as they all use their Shadow Meld and de-aggro. Now, Abrakeydabra doing the same thing as they start up their skip.
Once again, for the 3rd time in Motherlode, 40k is now engaging Mogul Razdunk. No cooldowns available aside from that army from Wolf Disco, no Bloodlust. They're just going to deal with the boss the way it was meant to be, just with their normal abilities, no cheating major group cooldowns, none of that. But Mogul Razdunk, we're going to have to see, because this is a fortified instance, how much of a difference the double army plus the Bloodlust is going to make for them. They have to not only catch up this extra 30% behind the boss they are, but they also have to finish the dungeon 15 seconds faster than 40k. And we've seen 40k deal with this boss 3 times. They've had no mistakes the other 2 times we saw them do it. and I'm assuming in their 1554 run that they had in time trials, they probably didn't have any mistakes there either. So I don't really see 40K having any problems on this boss.
Yeah, there's the Bloodlust being popped and the double army come out of Abrakeydabra. You can see the health of the boss melting, but not as fast as 40K. Unfortunately, they're not able to catch up as 40K got the boss to intermission already, and Abra is just now getting it. So they definitely caught up, but not enough. As you mentioned, they not only do they have to overcome 40K, but they need to be 15 seconds ahead. So I think it's just too little too late for Abra here. And there's no way to speed up this intermission phase either, because the fixate from the boss is just on a set timer. So there's no way of you to do this any faster compared to 40K. The only way would be to do the second phase faster and do more damage to the boss. But at this point, there's no cooldowns left. There's no way they can, with the same setup running as well, that they can just catch up on the damage there.
I mean, credit where credit's due. That was pretty impressive that they engaged the boss when 40K was at 70%, and they entered the intermission at almost the exact same time. If the death counters were at the same point and both teams had the same amount of deaths, this would be really impressive, really neck and neck. But the fact of the matter is both teams are running the same exact comp. Both teams have the same damage output available to them at this point, and there's really not a whole lot that Abrakeydabra can do to set themselves apart. I mean, 40K even got out of the intermission faster than Abrakeydabra did. There's no way they're going to come up with a 15-second lead at this point unless they somehow figured out a way to hack the game and do double damage for the rest of the fight.
I mean, there's a possibility. It's Dr. J after all. He does know how to do lots of damage. But either way, 40K is already at 90% and really doesn't look like they're having any sort of problems at all. And 40K, you really gotta say, I mean, they stepped up in this cup. We were talking about them saying that they don't really show up anymore like we are used to seeing them from the spring season. And the summer season, not really showing up in the first two cups. But now when it really matters and they really want to secure the BlizzCon spot, they're finishing off the boss here and they're winning against Abra 2-1.
40K completely showing up in this tournament, taking the series 2-1 over Abrakeydabra. Who'd have thunk it?
40K came to play, and they showed up big time on Motherlode. It's the third time they've won on this dungeon alone, and they just knocked Abrakeydabra out of the tournament, and they've made it so that Method NA on this one, Tettles, has secured that second seed for BlizzCon.
That was a really tight match at the very end. It looked like both of those strategies, even though they were a little bit different with some of the mobs that they were pulling, where they were getting count and everything else, like the Technician and the War Machine at the very end. It seemed like both of these matches were very close between both of these teams, and it was proven by the time trial time. Abrakeydabra looked like they had just like a slight advantage at the very beginning with how they were pathing through the R&D wing, where they were getting some of their trash, and then like 40K was like pulling the boss a little bit earlier than Abrakeydabra, because 40K gets a little bit more trash towards the end, whereas Abrakeydabra gets a little bit more of their trash towards the beginning. But then it was like just a few issues on coin-operated crowd pummeling, where the mock is running around like with Lightfoot and some shenanigans with the Peacekeepers and everything else. And then it was kind of close, and then a Shine is dead on Azarok, where 40K is like just 10% on the boss ahead. Both of those issues ended up culminating for a 40K win, which would have otherwise have been within, I don't know, like seconds between both of these teams. It would have been a very close match.
It would have been, but let's talk about just after the coin-operated crowd pummeler. We've seen so many aggressive pulls, some successful and some not.
Yeah, so what I actually like about this pull from 40K is the fact that they are avoiding that Void-Touched Emissary at all costs. That mob is
We've heard
terror. That guy, okay, so he does percentage health on every single cast to your tank, so basically your tank is going to struggle to be able to tank all of these mobs at once while tanking the Void-Touched Emissary, so I think it's a really good idea of 40K to be looking to pull around that pretty much as possible. And then you see the pack just getting completely obliterated by those double Death Knights doing insane amounts of damage, and then Rentari just walks away like nothing happened.
Yeah, he's able to be very successful onto that one, and how quickly they're able to kill them also just makes it so much easier for the tanks. They just front load all of their defensives, and then they're fine onto that one. So 40K going and moving on into the grand finals. That big win over Abrakeydabra. So Method NA 40K, who'd have thunk it?
There's something really interesting about Method NA here. And I remember we hit on this a little bit in Sydney when we were talking to the teams, getting their thoughts on some things. One of the things JB brought up, which was really interesting to me, is that every single time that Method NA and Method EU met in the grand finals, Method NA had to go through the lower bracket. They didn't get to have that luxury of winning their upper final match, going to the grand finals. I think this is the first time Method NA has ever had the luxury of winning the upper finals and getting to practice while the lower bracket matches played. So, you know, JB, you got your shot right here. You get to see what it's like. I mean, I would hope that you just take the series 2-0 in some fantastic sweep.
It might end up happening, because keep in mind, that's what they did at the beginning of the bracket in the round of 8 in those quarters. And then, you know, Method NA took the 2-0 sweep from there. And they were the ones who originally knocked 40K down. So 40K has had to have a very long run throughout the lower bracket. They've played the most out of anybody today. And well, today and yesterday as well, having to go through all of those games in order to do it. So it's going to be a really tall task to be able to beat Method NA Nagura, because they've been on fire this weekend.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's almost going to be a miracle if 40K beats Method NA at this point, just because, I mean, the goal of 40K for this cup specifically was to go to BlizzCon, was to get that 4th spot. So maybe they didn't even practice some of the dungeons for the grand final. I don't think they're even, I mean, that's the first time they even get to the grand final, right? So they just have such an incredible run here, and as you mentioned, playing way more games than anyone else. So at this point, with Method NA also having much more time to prepare for the grand final, it really will be a miracle if 40K wins there.